when I had my initial diagnosis of diabetes, the doctor thought I might be a type 2 diabetic because of my weight at the time. And the advice I was given in that appointment was to stop eating carbs and fats and to start taking metformin twice a day. And that was just before the COVID pandemic really started to impact the country. It was in January last year. So that diagnosis came as a real shock to me, and it frightened the life out of me. And at that time, I was moving house and changing GP. So it was quite difficult to follow up with the first doctor because I'd moved to a different GP, and it was difficult to get an appointment at the new GP. So I was relying really heavily on the advice that the first doctor had given me around the diet. And I took that advice really seriously. So for the first 2 or 3 months, until the beginning of March, I would say, I was on an extremely strict diet of around 800 to 1,000 calories per day, and I was eating like a rabbit. So after those first few months, just at the very beginning of March, I managed to get an appointment at the hospital. It came as a phone call. The hospital wanted me to come in for an emergency same day appointment, and that was because they just received the results from my first GP, and from the results they thought I was a type 1 diabetic. So when I got there, they sat me down and did a few finger prick tests on me, but my blood sugars came back as normal, which had them scratching their heads a bit. But they explained that they thought I might be in a kind of honeymoon period with type 1 diabetes, which basically means that your body produces insulin as if you were not diabetic for a short period of time before giving up again. So that appointment was quite confusing, to say the least. And instead of giving me the whole spiel about how to manage type 1 diabetes, they sent me home with a test kit. They asked me to test myself 4 times a day, to go to A&E if I ever felt dizzy or sick, or had pain in the stomach, and to email them the results of the finger prick tests once a week. So it was quite confusing and overwhelming. Good news is, though, that they said that I could start eating carbs and fats again, which was great, and to avoid refined sugars, and if I were to eat carbs, to try and stick to refined carbs like whole grain sort of things. So I was able to return to a more kind of normal diet, but I still thought it was best to keep on a kind of restricted diet. So I started eating somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500 calories per day. So it was just after that appointment that the COVID pandemic really started to affect the country. The country went into lockdown and the NHS was overwhelmed. So it was really difficult from then on to get an appointment to see someone or to talk to someone. When I phoned the hospital or my GP, I could only ever leave a voicemail. When I emailed the results into the hospital, like they'd asked me to, I never got a response. So it was quite a scary time. And, at this point, I didn't know if I was type 1 or type 2 diabetic. But a few months later, around June or July, I finally had a phone call from the hospital with my final diagnosis, where they told me I was a type 2 diabetic. And they asked me to increase the dosage of metformin that I was on, which I'll speak about in the next video. So it was a good 6-month period where I didn't know what type of diabetic I was. So it was quite scary and I felt quite lost. So during that period, I turned to the internet to look for advice, which is where I came across Diabetes UK, which has been just an invaluable resource for me and just so helpful. It helped me understand both type 1 and type 2 diabetes, what signs to look out for complications with diabetes. There's great recommendations on there for diabetic friendly meals, and I think most importantly, and why I'm doing this today, is other people's stories of their struggle with diabetes, and the really interesting research into diabetes and putting it into remission. So reading other people's stories, I think, gave me a lot of comfort, because I knew that I wasn't the only person struggling with the diagnosis, and I wasn't the only person finding it confusing. And the second thing was, which I got a lot of comfort from, was reading the research about putting or helping people put diabetes into remission, because from reading the research, I at least felt that I was kind of on the right track if I were a type 2 diabetic. In the next video, I'll talk to you about my experience with remission.